The boy had never hugged anyone, never said a word for 6 years, not even to his own father, a billionaire famous for his lack of emotions, until he fell into the arms of a strange waitress. And in that moment, the billionaire's entire life collapsed. No one expected that an accidental hug would become the reason why the most powerful man in the city gave up both his faith and control. Just a few days later, a photo was leaked. A sincere hug became the focus of rumors, and the billionaire father made the worst decision of his life. The breakfast rush had just passed, and sunlight streamed through the dusty front windows of Penny's Corner, a small family-owned restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of Santa Fe, New Mexico. The scent of brewed coffee, fresh biscuits, and hickory bacon hung in the warm air, wrapping the space in something that felt like a memory you didn't realize you missed. The old brick walls, faded checkered floors, and mismatched chairs gave the place a charm too humble to be called vintage. Locals loved it not because it was fashionable, but because it was familiar. Regulars sat in their usual spots. Waitresses knew the orders before menus were touched, and the cook in the back swore like a sailor but made the fluffiest pancakes in town. That morning, the booth by the window, usually reserved for Sheriff Morales and his crossword puzzle, was taken by someone no one quite expected to see here, Grant Whitaker. 65 years old, widower, reclusive billionaire. A man who built an empire from mining contracts and logistics deals so complex most folks just nodded when he tried to explain them. He wasn't the type you'd find in a place like this. Too rich, too pressed, too distant. But there he was, in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to look approachable, though his posture was stiff, guarded, like he never really learned how to relax in public. Across from him sat a black boy, 6 years old, with a mop of blonde curls that hadn't seen a comb that morning. Eli Whitaker, Grant's only son. The boy kept his arms locked tight around himself and stared at the table as if it might do something unexpected. Every time a plate clattered or someone laughed too loud, his little body flinched. He didn't speak, didn't look around, didn't touch a thing, not even the blueberry muffin untouched on his plate. Eli wasn't like other children his age. He had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and a developmental emotional delay. Words Grant had paid specialists thousands of dollars to explain, yet still barely understood. All he knew was this. His son didn't like to be touched, couldn't make eye contact for more than a second, and had never, not once, hugged his own father. Sophie Lane noticed it all without needing to ask. She had just refilled the coffee of a couple in the next booth when she caught sight of the boy, shoulders tight, fingers twitching near the edge of the table like they wanted to reach out and hide under it. She adjusted her apron and crossed the room with a kind of gentle energy that didn't make noise. 32, bright-eyed despite the morning shift, and with a smile that never felt forced, she had worked here for almost a year now. Long enough for folks to know she'd once trained as a pediatric nurse before things got complicated. Long enough to know she had a soft spot for kids, especially the quiet ones. She didn't rush to speak. She didn't crouch down and baby talk him like some might. She simply met Grant's eyes with a soft, understanding nod, then looked to the boy. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Can I get you something else, sweetie? Maybe some warm milk?" Eli didn't answer, but he looked up for just a second, and that, in Sophie's experience, meant more than any spoken word. It happened so fast, and yet in the moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. A plate had crashed in the kitchen, ceramic against tile, sharp and sudden, and Eli's tiny frame jolted like he'd been struck. His breathing hitched, shallow and rapid, and his eyes darted in every direction like a cornered animal. He pressed his hands hard against his ears, his body rocking slightly as the world around him became too loud, too bright, too much. Grant froze, instinctively reaching out across the table, but unsure what to do. His voice caught in his throat. "Eli," he said softly, then louder, "Eli, it's okay. It's just a plate. But the boy wasn't hearing him. Not really. People turned. Forks hovered midair. Conversations halted. That's when Sophie moved, not quickly, not dramatically. She stepped out from behind the counter and knelt a few feet away from Eli, far enough to respect his space, close enough to be seen. She didn't speak, didn't reach. Instead, she opened her arms wide and calm, palms up, an offering, an invitation, nothing more. Eli stared at her, his breath still quick, his chest still trembling. Seconds passed, and then, without a word, without warning, he got up from the booth, walked slowly toward her, and folded himself into her arms. The diner held its breath. Grant stood frozen, his hand still halfway across the table, his mouth slightly open. In 6 years, not even he had been held by his son. Not once. Until now. Sophie was wiping down the counter the next morning when she saw him again. Same crisp shirt, same stiff posture. But this time, Grant Whitaker didn't walk in like a man tolerating the presence of others. He walked in like someone searching for something he wasn't sure he deserved to find. He waited until the breakfast crowd had thinned out before approaching her. No entourage. No assistant. Just a man standing quietly at the counter, holding his hat in his hands. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice rougher than it had been the day before, "for what you did yesterday." Sophie glanced up from the coffee pot, then gave a polite, uncertain smile. "He's a sweet boy." Grant hesitated. "He's not like other children. He screams when doctors try to check his heartbeat. He won't even sit beside his therapists. But yesterday, he walked across her room and he hugged you." Sophie nodded slowly, not because she was proud, but because she understood. "Sometimes," she said gently, "kids just know when someone's not trying to fix them." Grant was silent a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I don't know what you do outside of this place, but I'd like to offer you something. Not a job. Not exactly. I just thought maybe you can spend time with Eli. Talk to him. Or don't. Play a game, read a book, or just sit. Whatever feels right." Sophie looked at the card but didn't take it right away. "I'd pay you well," he added quickly, as if embarrassed by the need to mention it. Of course. But Sophie wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about the way the boy had pressed his face into her shoulder, how his breath had slowed while she held him, how for one moment, the weight in his little chest seemed to lift. "I'll think about it," she said, placing the card beside the napkin dispenser. Grant nodded, then turned to leave, but paused, almost awkwardly. "One more thing," he said. "I found this on the floor of the back seat. I think it's meant for you." He handed her a folded piece of paper, small and creased, the edges bent from being gripped too tightly by tiny fingers. Sophie opened it carefully. Inside, in thick crayon strokes, was a picture. 2 stick figures, arms outstretched, a shaky red heart between them. It wasn't much, but it didn't have to be. Sophie stared at it for a long moment, her throat tightening unexpectedly. Some invitations don't come in envelopes. Some don't use words. Some come in the form of a child's drawing born from a place deeper than language. She looked up, her voice softer than before. "Tell him I'd love to come by. Just for a little while." Grant nodded again. But this time, there was something different in his eyes. Not just relief. Something closer to hope. Sophie didn't know what this meant for her life. She hadn't planned on anything changing. But in that moment, she knew something already had. Not because a billionaire asked her to help, but because a child she barely knew had asked her without saying a single word. Sophie never treated her time with Eli like a job. She never carried a clipboard, never came armed with behavior charts or therapeutic exercises. She didn't try to fix him, diagnose him, or pull him out of his quiet world. She simply showed up, day after day, on time, with a soft voice, gentle presence, and a worn tote bag filled with picture books, colored pencils, and scraps of blank paper. She always asked the same question first. "Would you like to draw today or listen to a story?" Sometimes Eli would point. Sometimes he'd shrug. Sometimes he'd say nothing at all. And that was fine. Sophie would sit beside him on the floor of the sunroom, never too close, never too far, and begin anyway. She'd tell stories without pages, just her voice and her hands painting pictures in the air about turtles who were afraid of thunderstorms, or birds who didn't know how to fly until they tried. When she drew, it was never perfect. Wobbly dogs with too many legs, lopsided trees, stick people with crooked grins. Eli would watch, amused, and sometimes grab a crayon and add something of his own, a second sun, a missing cloud, a scribble that looked like nothing and everything all at once. Every now and then, when Eli's breath hitched or his shoulders tensed from a sound outside, Sophie would pause and say the same thing. If you feel scared, she'd say softly, you can hug me. Or let me hug you. Only if you want to. She never forced it. Never reached first. And often, he didn't respond. But then, slowly, something shifted. One cloudy afternoon, Eli dropped his green crayon and walked straight to her, arms open, silent. Another evening, after a long and wordless day, he leaned into her shoulder, letting out a sigh so heavy it felt like he'd been holding it in for years. And once, after a short moment where Grant had misread his son's signals and spoken too loudly, Eli turned to Sophie, eyes wide and wet, and hugged her tight, grounding himself in her steadiness. It wasn't therapy. It was presence. And for Eli, presence made all the difference. Grant Whitaker had always believed in control, in strength, and discipline. His world was one of numbers and deadlines, negotiations, and consequences. He built his empire from nothing, deals struck in boardrooms, contracts signed in silence, emotions left at the door. Affection was something you earned. Vulnerability, a luxury for people who had time to be weak. But lately, something was shifting quietly, uncomfortably. He found himself lingering by the doorway longer when Sophie was with Eli, watching as his son leaned into her side without flinching. Noticed how Eli's hands, once constantly clenched, now rested open in his lap. How his eyes didn't dart around the room so much anymore. Grant couldn't explain the knot in his chest when he saw those small moments. Only that they didn't hurt, but they did ache. He didn't say much. Not to Sophie. Not even to himself. But he watched. And slowly, the silence in his house began to feel less like a void and more like a pause. Something waiting to be filled. One afternoon, Grant met with an old business associate over coffee in a downtown hotel lounge. Calvin Rhodes' oil money, loud ties, twice divorced, was never known for subtlety. So, Calvin said, swirling his drink, word around the golf club is you've got some waitress playing nanny to your kid now. Grant raised an eyebrow but didn't answer. Calvin chuckled. Come on, Dan. A waitress? What did she do but her eyelashes at you? You really paying her just so your son can what, hug her? Grant's face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. He took a slow sip of coffee, then set the cup down with precision. Yes, he said simply. I am. Calvin blinked, caught off guard. Grant continued, his voice calm but firm. Because my son hadn't hugged anyone in over 2 years. Not me. Not anyone. Now he does. Now he knows what it feels like to trust someone. To feel safe. He leaned back, expression unreadable. If I'm paying for that, I'd say it's the best investment I've made in a long time. Calvin didn't laugh again. And for the first time in a very long time, Grant didn't feel the need to defend softness. Not anymore. The photo surfaced on a Tuesday morning, buried among a stream of clickbait headlines and gossip-fueled chatter. It wasn't even high quality, slightly grainy, taken from across the diner through the window's glare. But it didn't need to be sharp. The image told a story all on its own. A small boy, arms wrapped tightly around a woman's waist, face buried in her sweater. And standing just a few feet away, unnoticed by the camera, was a man with silver at his temples and confusion in his eyes. The headline did the rest. Billionaire's son clings to unknown waitress, morning cuddle, or something more. By noon, it had spread across local blogs, a few national gossip sites, and even made it onto a segment of daytime television where panelists speculated on inappropriate boundaries and why the wealthy trust strangers with their children. Grant saw it as he walked out of a lunch meeting, a concerned text from his assistant popping up with a link and the words, "You'll want to handle this before it spirals." He didn't open the article right away. He stared at the thumbnail instead. At Eli, his Eli, caught in the most vulnerable moment of his young life, broadcast to the world without his knowing. And standing beside him in that photo was Sophie. His jaw tightened, his chest burned. In less than an hour, Grant had pulled strings to remove the most viral versions of the story. His legal team drafted a cease and desist. His PR consultant called it unfortunate but manageable. But none of that mattered. Because in Grant's mind, there was only one question that refused to go quiet. How did this get out? He remembered the quiet days in the sunroom. Sophie's calm presence. The drawing Eli made. The progress. The trust. And now this. By late afternoon, Grant had made up his mind. He didn't confront her. Didn't ask for an explanation. He simply called the diner, asked for her shift schedule, then left a message with the manager. Tell her the arrangement is over. No further visits. No contact. No signature. No goodbye. Sophie received the message during a break between tables. She didn't cry. She didn't call back. She simply walked to the back room, sat down, and unfolded the drawing Eli had once given her, the stick figures, the red crayon hearts still smudged from little fingers. She stared at it for a long time. No one had to tell her what had happened. She'd seen the headline that morning too. But what hurt more than the photo was knowing that Grant hadn't even asked her. He hadn't wondered whether she was the one behind it. He had just assumed. Outside, customers laughed over breakfast, unaware that something delicate had just been broken. And in the quiet that followed, Sophie reached into her bag, folded the drawing back into its original creases, and tucked it away. Some connections, it seemed, weren't meant to last. Sophie never tried to defend herself. No phone call. No text. No visit to Grant's home to ask for a chance to explain. She understood, perhaps too well, that once someone like him made up his mind, words were unlikely to change it. And she had never been the kind of person to beg for what should have been a conversation in the first place. Instead, she folded a piece of plain, unlined paper in half twice and sat at the corner table during her break, pen in hand. No greeting. No signature. Just one simple sentence written in her soft, looping script. Not everyone needs words. Sometimes all it takes is someone calm enough to offer their hand. She read it once, then folded it again and slipped it into a small envelope she'd carried in her bag for no particular reason until now. No perfume. No drama. Just a quiet truth offered without expectation. After her shift, Sophie walked to the gated entrance of Grant's estate. She didn't buzz the intercom. Didn't wait for anyone to come out. She placed the envelope gently inside the mailbox and turned to leave, her hands still warm from holding it. As she walked away, the sky above Santa Fe was turning the deep gold it only gets for a few minutes each evening. And in that brief golden hush, Sophie didn't feel angry. Just still. Some things weren't meant to be argued. Some silences carried more meaning than 1,000 explanations ever could. The truth came quietly, like most important truths do. It was Grant's chief of security who finally tracked the source of the photo days after the story had already begun to fade from the public's eye. The image hadn't been leaked by a staff member or an insider. It hadn't come from anyone Sophie knew. It was a random customer, someone passing through town, sipping coffee and scrolling their phone while they watched from a corner booth. They'd snapped the photo without thinking, posted it for attention, and walked away without ever understanding what they'd captured. No malice. No scheme. Just carelessness. Grant read the report with a blank expression, the weight of it sinking in slowly. Sophie hadn't betrayed him. She hadn't used Eli's vulnerability for attention. She'd done exactly what she always had, offered kindness without expecting anything in return. And he had cut her off without a word. That same week, Eli changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But Grant saw it in the small things, the way Eli stopped humming softly in the morning, how he no longer waited by the window in the sunroom, his crayons untouched in their tin. Nights became harder. The boy tossed and turned. He whimpered in his sleep. The comfort he'd found in touch, the thing Grant had once dismissed as unnecessary, was now a wound. A missing piece. For days, Grant tried to fill the space. He read stories, brought new books, sat beside his son in silence, hoping presence alone might be enough. It wasn't. One night, well past midnight, Grant passed by Eli's room and noticed the soft glow of the night light still flickering beneath the door. He hesitated, then knocked gently before opening it. What he saw made him pause. Eli was curled on the bed, hugging a pillow to his chest. His eyes were open, but heavy with fatigue. He was trying to find comfort in fabric and feathers, something that might trick his body into feeling safe again. Grant stepped closer. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice low. Eli didn't look up. He just pressed his cheek deeper into the pillow. "This one's not warm," he whispered. "Not like her." The words hit like a Whitaker in Grant's stomach. Not warm like her. He sat down on the edge of the bed, not touching, just there. In that moment, everything became clear. The hug, that hug, hadn't just been a miracle. It hadn't just been about progress or therapy or breakthroughs. It was the first time Eli had felt accepted exactly as he was. The first time someone reached out not to change him, but simply to hold space for him. Sophie hadn't taught Eli how to function. She had taught him how to feel safe, how to trust, how to love, and perhaps most importantly, how to love himself. Grant had spent his life building things, buildings, systems, a legacy. But what Sophie had built with nothing more than time, patience, and open arms, it was something far more powerful. He looked at his son, small and quiet under the covers, holding a pillow that couldn't give back the warmth he craved. And Grant finally understood. It wasn't just Eli who needed her. It was him too. The community library wasn't crowded that morning. A few parents with restless toddlers filled the reading corner. Elderly couples thumbed through large print novels. The smell of old books and warm carpet lingered in the air. In the far back, seated on a beanbag chair, Sophie Lane held a worn copy of Edmund and the Purple Crayon and read aloud, her voice low and animated, letting the rhythm of the story carry over the quiet hum of conversation. Grant stood at the entrance of the children's section, unnoticed. For a long moment, he watched, her hair tucked behind one ear, hand tracing the page as she spoke. The children listened. But Grant's eyes were on her face, not the book. There was peace there, the same peace he had seen on Eli's face once, before he'd broken everything. When the story ended and the children scampered off with juice boxes, Grant stepped forward, holding something far heavier than pride. "I'm sorry," he said. Sophie turned, surprised. Her expression shifted from polite confusion to quiet recognition. "I believed something I shouldn't have," Grant continued. "I let fear speak louder than truth." He pulled in a breath. "I'm the richest father I know, but I wasn't rich enough to teach my son how to hug someone, or how to let someone hug him back." Sophie didn't speak, but her eyes softened, and in that silence, forgiveness began. In the weeks that followed, something beautiful took root. Together, they launched a small nonprofit called Touch of Trust, a gentle program designed not to diagnose or fix, but to guide children with emotional or developmental challenges into moments of safe, intentional connection. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't instruction. It was presence, warmth, and kindness, offered freely without expectation. At the launch event, held in the sunny courtyard of a local community center, families gathered unsure of what to expect. There were no suits, no speeches, just music, story circles, and soft blankets spread over the grass. Eli stood beside Sophie at the front, one hand clutching the hem of her cardigan. When she knelt beside him, he looked into her eyes, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her waist. In front of everyone, the crowd fell silent. Then slowly, Eli turned toward his father. He didn't speak. He didn't rush. He simply raised both arms, palms open, a silent invitation Grant had once thought would never come. Grant's throat tightened. He stepped forward, knelt, and gathered his son into his arms. For the first time, truly, no tension, no hesitation, just warmth, just love, and the quiet, steady realization that the richest moments in life are the ones money can never buy. If you believe that the right hug, given at the right moment, can heal even the deepest wounds in the heart, leave us a like. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Heart Stories for more stories that inspire, comfort, and remind us of what really matters. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you in the next video.